What exactly is a recession, and are we in one? Are we heading for one? Because over the last few years, I've gotten comments in my DMs and in my posts talking about, well, we've been in a recession for 2 or 3 years, or in the last administration we were in one, and I think it's really important for us to get our definitions correct. Now, that's not to say that people haven't been suffering economically. I think a lot of it has to do with the vast amounts of income inequality, but I think it's important that we get our definitions firmed up here.
Now, the economy goes through periods of ups and downs. It's known informally as the boom-bust cycle. And a recessionary period is essentially a period of time where there's a decline in economic activity. Now, the National Bureau of Economic Research is a team of economists that determines whether or not we are in a recession. And the general basic rule of thumb is that a recession is when we have a decline in GDP during 2 consecutive economic quarters. Now, we actually have data from the St. Louis Fed that shows us how GDP has increased or decreased since around 1945. And you can see from this chart, these gray areas, those are the areas where economists have determined we are in a recession. You can see from this chart, the last time we were in a recession was in 2020. That was during the COVID-19 pandemic. People were losing their jobs. There was a lot of economic activity. People weren't going out and purchasing things. You can also see identified in this data the Great Recession of 2008, again plagued by these mass layoffs and lack of economic consumer activity. That's generally how we think about what happens to consumers during a recession. You might be asking yourself, well, Sarah, in 2022, didn't we experience 2 quarters of consecutive GDP decline? And I have 2 answers for this, because initially, in initial forecasts, yes, we did see 2 consecutive quarters in Q1 and Q2 of GDP growth. However, there's 2 caveats to this. The first is that, and this is not unusual in the economics field, those numbers were subsequently revised, and it was found that in Q2 of 2022, GDP growth actually increased by around 0.3%. Assuming that didn't happen, that rule of 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth is not a hard and fast rule by economists. There are other aspects of data that we look at, particularly how bad the recession is and how widespread it is and for how long it's going for. When you look at the components of GDP and how they change during that time, for those of you that don't know, we calculate GDP by taking the sum of consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and net exports. We find that, first of all, investment spending is actually going up. During a recession, we would see all 4 of these things to decline in general. The other thing that we see is that most of where this change is coming from is coming a lot from net exports. And economists theorize that this was happening because of the war in